If you're watching this video, chances are you're either considering a Canon zoom in the 100 to 400mm range, or you already own one and think about upgrading. Or maybe you simply enjoy watching my videos, which is much appreciated. Either way, by the end of this video, you will know exactly which one of these lenses is the best overall, and also which one will be the best suited for you. And these two things are not necessarily the same. Each of these lenses kind of overlap in certain areas, but at the same time are quite different and also come with their own strengths and weaknesses and very different price tags. I'm Jan Wegener, and for over 20 years I've dedicated myself to capturing unique bird photos and videos and helping others just like you to create your own masterpieces. Let's start this video with the 100 to 400mm version 1 lens. Not only because it's the first lens in the lineup, but also because it's the one lens that I wouldn't really recommend unless you already own it. The older design with the sort of push-pull zoom, aka the dust pump, is prone to dust issues, and the image quality also slightly falls behind the other three lenses. The only time the version 1 lens is a viable option in my opinion is if you're still shooting with a DSLR camera and you're on a super tight budget. Otherwise, I think the other three lenses are a much better option for you, and that's why I'll focus on those three in the video going forward. The first one is the Canon EF 100 to 400 version 2, which is a fantastic lens offering great image stabilization, strong optical performance, and a compact and lightweight design. It also works well with the EF 1.4 extender, even though then stopping down one stop is advised to get the maximum sharpness. This lens comes with an aperture range of f4.5 on the short end to f5.6 at 400mm and weighs in at just 3.61 pounds or 1.64 kilos. Over the years, this lens has yielded me many great results in the field. It's easy to handle, weather sealed, and just all around a great option. If you're planning to use this lens with a mirrorless camera, you have to remember that you need an EF to RF adapter to be able to use it on the mirrorless cameras, which will add a little bit of size and weight to your setup. The most impressive lens in this lineup is Canon's RF 100 to 500mm lens. It's actually slightly larger but lighter than the EF version 2 lens. I like to think of this lens as a 100 to 400mm lens on steroids, giving us an extra 100mm on the long end without adding any extra weight, which makes it incredibly versatile and easy to travel with. Its short minimum focusing distance also allows us great magnification for portraits or even emergency macro shots. On top of that, it also works well with both teleconverters, giving us even more reach if we need it. The lens comes with an aperture range of f4.5 on the short end to f7.1 at 500mm and weighs in at just 3 pounds or 1.365 kilograms. This is one of my most used lenses in the field, and it has given me fantastic photos and especially also handheld video in the field. And I feel like the extra 100mm off the 100 to 500 compared to the 100 to 400mm can make a big difference. So all around a fabulous lens. And lastly, we have the tiny yet surprisingly capable RF 100 to 400mm lens. Despite its compact size and budget-friendly price, this lens comes with impressive sharpness. It shouldn't be this good, but it really is, and it comes in at just 1.4 pounds or 635 grams. This lens comes with a somewhat slow aperture range starting at f5.6 on the short end, going all the way down to f8 on the long end, which definitely makes it a little bit harder to use this lens in low light situations. If weight and handholdability is a concern for you, if you pair this tiny lens with an R10 camera for instance, you get an amazing small and lightweight combo that basically anyone could handhold all day. Of course, there are some drawbacks with a lens like this, but overall the RF 100 to 400 delivers fantastic photos and videos and punches well above its weight, delivering great results at a fabulous price point. When it comes to the body design and handling, all three lenses are quite similar and they are external zooms. That means they extend out whenever you're zooming towards the longer end. The EF 100 to 400 version 2 and the 100 to 500 are both L-series lenses, which means they come fully weather sealed and with high-end coatings on the front elements. I've used both of these lenses in pretty harsh conditions and heavy rain and never really had any issues, but I always make sure that when I dry the lens in the house that are fully extended so there's not water trapped into the lens if I, for instance, zoom back while it was wet. The IF 100 to 400 on the other hand is not an L-series lens and comes in a lower end black body, which has not as high-end coatings on the front element, less weather sealing, and also fewer switches on the lens itself. For instance, we can't find a focus limiter switch there. All three of the lenses feature a large zoom ring and also a manual focus ring. And both of the RF versions also have that RF control ring with that you can assign different functions to. Both L lenses also come with a lens hood and a lens foot, whereas that is missing on the RF 100 to 400mm lens. The EF version 2 lens comes with a ring USM motor, the 100 to 500 comes with a nano USM motor, and the RF 100 to 400 comes with a STM motor. The biggest difference between these three is how fast they focus and how smoothly they track your subjects. The STM motor in the RF 100 to 400mm lens is known for very smooth tracking, which makes it great for video, but has the overall slowest autofocus. The ring USM motor in the EF version 2 lens has the fastest focus acquisition, which is great for tracking action, for instance, but at the same time, it's not as smooth when tracking, and you see this especially when you're tracking in video mode and the subject quickly comes towards you, or you're focusing between different subjects that are at a different distance from you. The nano USM motor in a 100 to 500mm lens strikes a balance between speed and smoothness, making it ideal for photo and video. In terms of autofocus overall and the tracking ability and the speed, I would give a slight edge to the RF 100 to 500mm lens, in particular because it seems to work better with the mirrorless cameras, closely followed by the EF version 2 lens and then the RF 100 to 400mm lens. When it comes to the image stabilization, all three lenses perform extremely well, and it's quite easy to do handheld video and to also handhold quite low shutter speeds. I might give a slight edge to the 100 to 500mm lens here, but it's closely followed by the EF lens and then also the RF 100 to 400. And no matter what lens or camera you're using, the best way to actually improve your results today is to learn better image editing techniques. Because with the right editing workflows, we can transform even below average RAW files into fantastic looking final images. And I would love to help you to get outstanding results from your own RAW files with my Lightroom and next generation Photoshop Masterclasses. In these classes, I teach you step by step and in easy to follow chapters everything you need to know in Photoshop and Lightroom to turn your own RAW files into stunning masterpieces. But you won't just be watching. I'm also providing you with my own RAW files so you can edit right alongside me and apply everything you've learned right there and then. And if you're not sure whether my masterclasses are worth it or the right fit for you, check out some of the amazing reviews I receive weekly from many happy people I've already helped to transform their editing lives. So if you want to turn editing from a frustrating chore where you don't really know what to do and what slider to pull into a rewarding experience where you enjoy the process and get fantastic results, then check out my Lightroom and Next Generation Photoshop Masterclasses down there in the description. I know they will help you a lot. What's great about all three of these lenses is the fantastic minimum focusing distance, allowing us to use all of them for nice close-up shots and even emergency macro shots. When it comes to shooting in low light conditions, none of these 30 lenses would be my first choice, but they still perform reasonably well because they have the good image stabilization. The one lens that negatively stands out here would be the RF 100 to 400mm lens because of the very slow aperture of f8 at 400mm. And using f8 in very dark conditions is definitely a big challenge. The EF version 2 lens gives us a slight edge in dark conditions because it's wide open at 400mm and f5.6, whereas the 100 to 500mm lens is wide open at f6.3 and 400mm, and then wide open at f7.1 at 500mm. What's great about mirrorless cameras is that you can use much higher ISOs. And that also renders a relatively slow lens wide open at f8 like the RF 100 to 400 into a still usable lens in most shooting conditions, which is great. You will just have to run a software like Adobe Enhance or DXO Pure RAW later to clean up the noise in the files. Overall, I think we get the best low light performance from the 100 to 500 because it has nice and fast autofocus and also that good image stabilization, making it a little bit easier to shoot in tough conditions. When it comes to the image quality and sharpness in particular, all three of these lenses work really well. And it's actually quite surprising how well the RF 100 to 400 can keep up with the other two. Purely based on sharpness, it's hard to fault any of the three lenses. But we have to remember that the EF version 2 and the 100 to 500 are both L-series lenses with better nano coatings on the front elements. The RF 100 to 400 doesn't have as expensive coatings, which means it can be more prone to flaring and also chromatic aberrations and fringing in certain lighting situations. So while sharpness and details are very good with all three lenses, there is one big difference we can see in the field, and that is the background blur on the RF 100 to 400mm lens. It's worse than on the other two lenses. And unless your background is super far away and you're very close to your subject, it's very hard to render nice and smooth backgrounds with the RF 100 to 400mm lens. So there's definitely one big difference between the lenses, and this is the main area where we see the sort of price difference show up as well. If I had to rank the lenses, I would give the 100 to 500 a slight edge, but it would be very close when it comes to image quality and sharpness. The biggest difference here really is that with the 100 to 500, we can zoom out to 500mm and still get fantastic image quality and sharpness. And with the other two lenses, we either have to crop a fair bit or use a teleconverter to get to that 500mm range, and then image quality takes a bit of a hit. Speaking of getting beyond 400mm, you can use teleconverters on all three lenses and they work relatively well, but especially on the EF 100 to 400 version 2, it makes sense to stop down one stop to regain full sharpness. It's already nice and sharp at f8 wide open, but if you stop down to f11, sharpness definitely increases. The biggest downside to using teleconverters on these zoom lenses is that you use a lot of light. The 100 to 400 version 2 is wide open at f8, and the RF 100 to 400 will be wide open at f11 with the teleconverter. So both of these lenses will then need quite good light to still be able to get good images. So in the 500mm range, the 100 to 500 at 500mm and 7.1 definitely offers us a bit of an edge in the field. And we can use teleconverters on that lens as well, and even the 2x teleconverter still gives us some good results, even though wide open at f14 is less than ideal. But with the 1.4 extender in particular, this lens goes up to 700mm and gives us good image quality at f10 wide open already. The biggest downside with the 100 to 500 is that it has a very strange flaw, and that is the limitation when you use it with teleconverters, because you cannot zoom further back than 300mm, basically taking away a lot from the range that you're getting with that lens. Because the teleconverters protrude out into the lens, you cannot zoom back all the way anymore, and the lens kind of stays out half zoomed out, which is really annoying if you want to put it in a backpack, for instance. So if you use the 100 to 500 with teleconverters, you will constantly have to take them on and off to be able to use the lens properly, which is very annoying and not a great design. So while using teleconverters can work quite well on these lenses, especially stop down, it wouldn't be something that I want to do all the time. The bare lens definitely gives us better f-stops and better image quality and sharpness overall. And with the RF 100 to 400 in particular, we also have to ask ourselves, is it worthwhile buying a lens that's quite cheap and then buying an RF 1.4 teleconverter that basically costs the same as the lens? Here's one thing to remember though. If you're using an EF lens, you have to use an EF teleconverter. And if you're using an RF lens, you will have to use the RF teleconverters. The biggest question you have to ask yourself as a wildlife photographer is whether 400mm on the long end is enough or not, especially if you're using a full frame camera. If you're using an APS-C crop camera like an R7 or an R10, then a 100 to 400mm lens suddenly can become a lot more attractive because it will give you an equivalent focal length for up to 640mm on the long end, making it a lot more viable for a lot of smaller wildlife or small birds, for instance. Personally, I've found 400mm always a little bit too short for wildlife and especially bird photography, and that's why I love the 100 to 500 so much, because that extra 100mm can definitely make a big difference in the field. And now you might say the difference between 400 and 500mm is not so much and I can easily crop that. And of course you can and still have good image quality. But where the difference really comes out is if your subject is too far away, even for 500mm. Because then you'll have to have a large crop with 100 to 500, but an even larger crop with 100 to 400mm lenses, giving you definitely less image quality and sharpness overall. And of course, now you can say you might put the 1.4 teleconverter on the 100 to 400mm lenses, but then you lose a little bit of sharpness again, and you're losing a bit of light at the same time as well. And then one could also argue that you can add the 1.4 extender to the 100 to 500, giving you even more reach again. Let's talk about some of the main weaknesses I see with each lens. With the 100 to 400 version 2, for me it's really just the heavier weight, the older build, and maybe in the future it will not work as well with more modern mirrorless cameras. And for instance, the image stabilization is already not as good as we can find in some of the newer lenses. And The biggest downside really to that lens is that a 100 to 500mm lens exists, because it basically gives us the same with an extra 100mm on the long end in a slightly lighter body. My main concerns with the RF 100 to 400 would be the lack of high-end weather sealings, maybe the lack of some of the coatings, and then also that it doesn't render the backgrounds as nice and smooth as the other lenses. The biggest downsides for me with the 100 to 500mm lens is how it works with the teleconverters, and that you can't zoom back lower than 300mm, only giving you a very short zoom range with the teleconverters, and also taking away the ability to make the lens nice and small again. And then, of course, it's more expensive than all of the other lenses. For me, the biggest question in determining what is the right lens for you would be, are you buying a new lens or are you upgrading from your lens that you already own? And also, are you wanting to shoot with mirrorless cameras or DSLR cameras? If you're still using a DSLR camera and plan to use it for another 2-3 years, then you will have to buy the EF version 2 lens in my opinion, because it's the only one that will actually work on a DSLR camera. Whereas if you're looking into buying a new lens and you're thinking about using mirrorless cameras, then I would definitely lean towards either RF option, because I think it will give you the best overall performance when it comes to autofocus and image stabilization with the mirrorless cameras. The toughest decision you're definitely facing if you already own the EF 100 to 400 version 2. Because then it's not as easy and clear cut to say that the 100 to 500 is definitely better, and it highly depends what you're shooting. Of course, you're getting a lens that is lighter, gives you an extra 100mm and has better image stabilization, but at the same time, is that worth the extra price tag for you? And maybe, I'm just throwing it out here, you will be happier to keep your EF 100 to 400 version 2 and look at a lens like the excellent 200 to 800mm lens to give you even more reach on the long end, and then have a nice 1-2 punch of the EF 100 to 400 version 2 and the 200 to 800mm lens. Whereas if you're someone that mainly would use this lens without teleconverters and that always uses that 100 to 400 or 100 to 500mm range, I think the 100 to 500 would definitely give you an edge. It has nice and smooth and fast autofocus, fantastic image stabilization, and it actually weighs less. So all of these things definitely give you an edge in the field. And you can also ditch that EF to RF converter. For me personally, I just love the 100 to 500mm lens, so I use it on a very regular basis, and I love having it as a second lens to my RF 600mm prime lens because it's so easy to travel with it, and that extra 100mm definitely makes a big difference in the field in certain situations. So which one is going to be the right one for you? Are you sticking with what you got? Are you upgrading? Are you buying a new lens? Let me know in the comments. Also give me a thumbs up for the video, check out my channel membership and my masterclasses, and hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!